Hello, how the heck are you? I'm pretty good today. I'm sitting in Utah and I'm having a good day. It's snow outside, and we're going to talk about blood for our lecture today. So, our objectives are as follows. You can see them in front of you, but we're going to talk about everything from the physical characteristics of blood, its components, its functions, the different types of cells in the blood, their functions. We're going to talk about blood typing, homeostasis, all of the above. Are also going to talk about a few disorders as well. Blood is first 55% of it is plasma, and 45% of it is red blood cells. And then you've got this little less than 1% white stuff that we call buffy coat. It's kind of funny, isn't it? Buffy coat. And that makes up the remainder of what's left after you have plasma and red blood cells. Anyway, so it's either the cellular components and the plasma make up the entire blood volume in general. Blood is, of course, as you know, is either scarlet to dark red. If it's scarlet, it's oxygenated. If it's dark red, the oxygen has been used up. pH is between 7.35 and 7.45, and we'd like it to stay that way. And men on average have 5 to 6 liters of blood, while women have 4 to 5 liters of blood. Let's see. So hemocrit is the percentage of red blood cells. So your body has so many red blood cells, it needs to get the oxygen out to all the cells in your body, and so the percentage of red blood cells in your blood is somewhat important. And so in males, it's 47, give or take 5%, and in females, it's 42% of your blood is red blood cells. So quite a bit of red blood cells. Interesting note about red blood cells. Red blood cells aren't really cells. They really don't have organelles. So interesting type of cell. We'll talk more about it in a few minutes. So if you take a sample of your blood and then put it in a centrifuge that just spins it around really super fast, and then take a look at it, what happens is it separates by density. And so the densest stuff, which is your red blood cells, comes down here and collects at the bottom. Then you get that buffy coat layer. It's this white cloudy stuff. It's in between it, less than 1% of your blood. And then the less dense, mostly water, plasma component is up at the top. So as you remember from a discussion earlier on in anatomy last semester, when we talked about connective tissue, blood is a connective tissue. And one of the reasons it is a connective tissue is because it's made of this hematopoietic tissue found in bone marrow. This hematopoietic stem cells originate from mesenchyme, the embryonic precursor to all connective tissues. So as you know, some of the functions of blood is obviously to distribute oxygen, O2, throughout the body. Your cells need that oxygen. It needs to get out there. As with nutrients, that's how nutrients gets to all the cells in your body, is through blood. Metabolic wastes are collected in your blood and returned into the kidneys for filtering. Hormones, as we talked about last week, are transported throughout your body through the blood as well. Your blood also regulates several things to help maintain homeostasis, or a constant body temperature, pH, and fluid volume. As we're going to talk about in a little bit, platelets help you prevent blood loss if you get a cut. We all like having platelets in order to stop that bleeding. And white blood cells are important when it comes to preventing and combating infection. Blood plasma, on the other hand, is 90% water, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, but the other 10% of blood plasma is made up of 100 different dissolved solutes, such as nutrients, gases, hormones, waste products, ions, and proteins. One of the big proteins, which is made by the liver, is albumin, and it is the most abundant protein in the body, and its primary purpose is to help maintain osmotic pressure in the blood. All the other proteins that you have in your body have many other different many different functions, buffering your blood against changes in pH and other functions, moves things around, important in blood clotting and immunity, as we've mentioned. So we're looking at a slide, or what we call a smear of whole blood. And so what you can see mostly is what we usually call red blood cells. In this case, we're calling erythrocytes, is most of what you see throughout this smear. In this corner way up here, we have platelets. Platelets are actually fragments of different broken up cells. So they're not really a whole cell either. The only one that's really a whole cell is what we in general call white blood cells. And white blood cells represent a family of different cells. Some are called neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes. Those are, as a family, we call either leukemocytes or white blood cells. Now we are going to discuss in detail red blood cells, or the erythrocytes. And so get ready to learn all you wanted to ever know about red blood cells. So erythrocytes, there is so many of them. There's 5 million per microliter. And so that's a huge amount. There's trillions of red blood cells in your body in order to transport all the things that it needs to transport. A few things about red blood cells that you need to know. First, it's bioconcave. Well, I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. But it increases the surface area of the red blood cell so that it can carry as much of those gases as it can. As I said, is it anucleated, meaning there's no nucleus, and this donut-looking cell is very flexible, so they can travel through these very, very tiny capillaries in your body. So let's look at it. So this is the biconcave design. So it's concave, concave. You can see as it goes down, and on the other side it's also concave, making it biconcave. You can see that super small, 7.5 micrometers in diameter, and its thickness is 2.5 micrometers. Super, super, super tiny. All right, so one of the nice things about hemoglobin, so this is the stuff inside of the red blood cell, hemoglobin, and it binds readily and easily to oxygen. And it also can release the oxygen just as easily. And so that's really nice. So 4 molecules of oxygen for 1 molecule of hemoglobin inside the red blood cell. So that's really important for us. We like that. Here's what hemoglobin looks like as a protein. Hemoglobin is a protein. And inside of the hemoglobin, you have these complex molecules with a center. Fe stands for iron. And around that you have N, which is nitrogen. And then you have these chains of carbon and hydrogen all the way around that. And these chains are specific to grab hold of oxygen and then transport it throughout your body. As you might be aware, blood is formed in your bone marrow, okay? And so this process of hematopoiesis occurs in your bone marrow, and it forms the red blood cells. And so this diagram kind of gives you an idea of how that might happen, okay? But just a few things that are important for red blood cell formation is iron, as of course, as you saw in our previous slide. Iron is in hemoglobin. We need it in order to have good red blood cell formation. And so what you have is these stem cells, and if you're forgetting what a stem cell is, stem cells are used for the formation of other cells. Your body needs them. They're kind of, in some ways, somewhat generic, and your body determines what cells are needed, and they form these cells. Once a new cell is formed from the stem cells, usually they go through mitosis, they split, they form a new cell, and it is then what we call a committed cell. It's going to go and form red blood cells as a result. And so it goes through these phases. We have 3 phases we call the development pathway. There's ribosome synthesis. So the ribosomes, remember, are used to develop proteins. And so the genetic code inside these red blood cells are pumping out all the hemoglobin it can, and phase 2 hemoglobin accumulation, it accumulates that hemoglobin. You see that it's starting to turn white. There's no oxygen, or it's not red yet. Then it gets rid of this erythroblast and eventually turns into our red blood cell. Okay? So how long do red blood cells live? Well, here's your answer: 100 to 120 days. As they grow old or get damaged, their membranes begin to decay, whatever, they become trapped in the spleen. The iron is pulled out at that point in the spleen, and the rest is transported over to the liver to be secreted into your intestines through the bile tract. And so that's how we get rid of red blood cells after they've served their purpose. How do we stimulate the growth of red blood cells? Well, your kidneys keep track of that. If your body's oxygen level starts to decrease for any reason, stimulation of red blood cells is done, and red blood cells are created. Homeostasis is really important in our blood, and so having enough oxygen, blood oxygen level, is really important for our cells, and so it's a really important balance to keep. And so the kidneys keep track of that balance. If some red blood cells are needed to be created, they send a signal to the bones. Bones create more and help maintain that balance. Anemia is one of the more popular, maybe not popular, but one of the more common disorders having to do with red blood cells. And that anemia simply stands for the ability of your blood to carry oxygen, and oxygen is decreased. So there's hemorrhagic anemia. So that comes from a hemorrhage or blood loss. You lose too much blood, you don't have enough oxygen in your blood, and you of course can die from that, and so it's really not a good thing. Hemolytic anemia, red blood cell lyse. Hemoglobin is abnormal, diffusion mismatch, there's parasites, bacteria infection, whatever is causing your hemoglobin not to transfer as much oxygen than is needed would fall into that category. Aplastic anemia is destruction or inhibition of bone marrow. So your bone marrow, for whatever reason, isn't working. You get exposed to radiation or drugs or other toxins that influence how much your bones make red blood cells, and that is also a form of anemia. Decreased hemoglobin content will also cause you to be anemic, because if you have an iron deficiency, you can become anemic. Lots of different reasons. Vitamin B12 deficiency could also cause your cells to be insufficient in carrying oxygen. Sickle cell anemia, that's a common African disease, not quite so common um, in, uh, in, in other parts of the world, but really common in Africa. And that is the malformation of red blood cells. So they look like a sickle rather than that donut looking shaped that we are used to. Here's a little picture of the two. And what happens is, so what you have here is these amino acids that are bounded together in this nice chain. There's 146 of these amino acids. And what happens is amino acid number 6 changes from one form to another, and as a result, you get a different formation or structure of the cell. And this cell just simply does not hold oxygen the way the normal cell does. And so people with sickle cell anemia really struggled with breathing problems. When it comes to the Olympics, some of you may have heard the term blood doping. And blood doping is simply the idea that you extract some of your blood earlier on, maybe a couple months earlier, and you store it, and then when it comes close to the time that you need to perform at an athletic event, you get a transfusion of it. All of a sudden you have lots more red blood cells than you normally have. Unfortunately, this causes polycythemia. That's too many red blood cells, and this can make your blood a little viscous and sluggish, and that's not a good thing either, because you don't want blood clots and stuff like that occur if you've got too much blood trying to get through your system. Anyway, your forum this week is on blood doping. I encourage you to make comments on what you think if blood doping should be allowed in Olympic events or not. You're welcome to look up things on the internet to make comments on according to blood doping, and research it a little bit and make a comment, and then the rest of us will respond to your comments. So I'm looking forward to that. When my father-in-law was trying to fight off terminal cancer through things like chemotherapy and other cancer-related treatments, one of the things they always tested when they did blood test was his white blood cell count. And the white blood cell count gives a good idea on how well your immune system is functioning. Why? Because it's one of the key factors at how your immune system does function. And so, as I said, there's several different types of white blood cells, and they all have specific functions. But most of the time, they're between 4,000 and almost 11,000 11,000 cells per microliter in your blood. And so there's still quite a few of those, not nearly the same amount as red blood cells, but quite a few. And some of the interesting things about white blood cells is they can travel through cell walls, capillary cell walls. They move around, so they're not releasing their oxygen out from the capillaries like red blood cells do. They actually leave the capillaries and go attack what they need to attack. In people that are doing well with their immune system, greater than 11,000 of them should be counted in a blood sample if there is an infection going on. So when you have, it's also a good indicator of infection. If you have an elevated white blood cell count, that's a good indication that you have some kind of infection. So this diagram kind of gives you an idea of the proportion of different red, white blood cells with platelets, and then specifically white blood cells and the counts they have. So most of your white blood cells are what we call neutrophils. We have eosinophils, basophils, and we have lymphocytes and monocytes as well. And we'll talk about those in a second. All right, so neutrophils fall under a group of cells that we call granulocytes. They're called granulocytes because their membranes are bound to cytoplasmic granules. They have lobed nuclei, and they eat the nasty things in our blood that we don't want to be there. We call that phagocytic, meaning they engulf the foreign element, whatever it is, and they metabolize it and break it down. Neutrophils are the most numerous. If you want a nifty way to remember the ranking of the different white blood cells, you can use this acronym here: never let monkeys eat bananas. And so let me go back here. So neutrophils are the most numerous. They start with an N, never. The next one, so they're 50 to 70% of white blood cells. Never let, so L is the next one. Lymphocytes, they're 20 to 45% of your white blood cells. Never let monkeys, so monocytes, 3 to 8%. Eat, so eosinophils, 2 to 4%. Eat bananas, so never let monkeys eat bananas. And that's a common one in the microbiology world to help you remember which of the white blood cells has the relatively more numerous than the other cells. So never let monkeys eat bananas. So white blood cells are attracted to inflammation. So if bacteria or something else is going on, they're attracted to it. They figure out what's going on, and they'll metabolize those foreign elements if they are present. Eosinophils attack parasitic worms, and to a lesser extent allergies. The one that we're really happy about when it comes to allergy season, or unhappy in some cases, is basophils. They contain histamine. So anyway, next. So then there's the agranulocytes. So they don't have the granules that the lymphocytes do. And we've talked about them. So in our acronym, never let. So these are the next two most numerous besides lymphocytes of the white blood cells, lymphocytes and monocytes. And they have T and B cells, and they're important in fighting off infections as well. These monocytes are the largest cells, and they become macrophages. Monocytes are also phagocytic, meaning that they engulf their prey, as you will. So cancer, microbes, whatever it is that they're searching for that is causing an infection, they go and engulf it, eat it, metabolize it, get rid of it for us. So the creation of white blood cells is illustrated by this diagram. I would encourage you to download the PowerPoint from the timeline and closely, and I believe this diagram is also in your textbook, closely follow the creation of white blood cells so that you have a good idea of how they're created. So let's talk about infections of white blood cells, or leukocyte disorders. So leukopenia is the abnormally low white blood cell count, and that can be from, you can have that problem from drugs or anti-cancer therapies. As I mentioned, my father-in-law, as he was struggling through cancer, often would get very, very low white blood cell counts as a result of the therapies that he would go through. Another one, which is also actually a cancer condition, is where the white blood cells themselves become cancerous. So somewhere along the line, a single white blood cell cloned itself, and it starts spreading. So your white blood cells themselves become cancer. Infectious mononucleosis is a result of the Epstein-Barr virus, and it's an excess of agranulocytes as a result. So platelets, this is the creation of platelets, and as you know, platelets are really important in coagulation. When you've got a cut, they help your body heal itself. And so this is the idea of how it creates. You have the stem cell. Again, that's the general cell that is used to determine, it goes through mitosis, and one cell remains a stem cell, and the other cell is determined to be a specific type of cell. And in this case, the cell is going to be platelets, or at least fractions of a cell that are what we call platelets. So the hemioblast, remember that blast is always referring to something that's creating something, goes through mitosis and it makes this megakaryoblast. Okay, megakaryoblast begins to develop these platelet properties, and eventually it starts to break off pieces of itself as it goes through stage 1 through 4, and those small pieces are what we call platelets. So when platelets are needed, you get a cut or something, what happens is your capillaries go through this, what we call vascular spasm. And the smooth muscle of the capillaries constricts and limits the blood flow, and this comes about from release of endothelial cells and from pain receptors. So you feel pain, your body reacts, and your blood vessels start to constrict in order to limit the loss of blood. Platelets then come by and start sticking to the area. They attach to collagen, and you get this buildup of platelets in the area. So coagulation, we've all heard of coagulation. You know, we get a scab when we get cut. Well, it happens in what we call 3 phases. And it all has to do with proteins. And so one of these proteins is what we call prothrombin activator. And it is formed, and then the PA converts prothrombin into what we call thrombin. Thrombin catalyzes the joining of what we call soluble fibrogen molecules to the insoluble fibrin mesh. So we need it to become insoluble in our blood so it stays there. And that kind of spider web result occurs and traps blood cells and begins to seal the hole that is in our blood. Here's a little diagram illustrating that. We have got our vascular spasm trying to limit the loss of blood. Platelets begin to form and plug this area. They go through that 3 phases of attaching to collagen, and they form that plug, and over time the fibrin forms a nice mesh over it and traps red blood cells and platelets from forming a clot in the area. So here's a nice diagram of what that looks under a microscope. I believe this is an electron microscope diagram, really small, but it gives you a good idea of how that spider web effect occurs with platelets. Let's take a few minutes to talk about blood typing. As you know, we all have what we call a blood type, and we're either A, AB, B, or O. We also have a positive or negative attached to that, and we can talk about that. These are what we call antigens, and antigens are important for us when we give or receive blood in blood donations, so that our body doesn't reject them because of our white blood cells. There's several blood conditions that we could talk about. Some of the big ones that I want to point out is atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is an inflammation of blood vessels, specifically around the heart, and that causes inflammation and eventually can cause clogging of the arteries around the heart, causing a heart attack. So that's a big one that I think you ought to be aware of, atherosclerosis. There's some other ones here. that can be a real problem. People who have arteriosclerosis are often prescribed aspirin to thin blood. Let's see, some other ones I wanted to point out here. If you don't get enough vitamin K, you could have impaired vision, and that has to do with procoagulants that are not made because of a lack of vitamin K. And that's about it for this lecture. Anyway, I hope you've had a great week. If you have any questions, please email me immediately and or give me a call and we can talk. If you're having problems with last week's test for any reason, you forgot to take it and need me to reopen it, remember I give you one opportunity for me to reopen the test for you to take it. And so this would be a good opportunity if you haven't taken the test. Any comments, concerns, let me know. Have a fantastic week and have fun storming the castle.